The lone wolf empath is not antisocial, but deeply self-protective. There is a common misunderstanding that those who prefer solitude must dislike people, that those who step back from crowds must lack social skill or emotional warmth. But the lone wolf empath does not withdraw because they are indifferent. They withdraw because they feel too much. Sensitivity, in its essence, is not fragility. It is heightened perception. The lone wolf empath walks into a room and absorbs what others overlook: the tension between two colleagues, the sadness behind a forced smile, the subtle shift in tone that signals disappointment or resentment. This is not something they switch on and off. It is automatic. When a nervous system has learned to scan for emotional cues early in life, it does so without conscious effort. Often this begins in childhood, in homes where moods were unpredictable, where love was present but inconsistent, or where emotional expression carried consequences. The child learns quickly that safety depends on attunement. If I can sense what others feel, I can adjust myself accordingly. Over time, this attunement becomes identity. The empath becomes the mediator, the listener, the one who understands without being told. They become indispensable in emotional environments. Yet inside, there is fatigue, because to constantly track the emotional climate of others requires energy. And when the energy is not replenished, withdrawal becomes necessary. From the outside, this withdrawal can look like avoidance. Friends may say, "You have changed, you used to be more available, you seem distant." What they do not see is the quiet calculation happening within. Is this space safe? Is my presence required only for emotional labor? Will I leave this interaction restored or depleted? The lone wolf empath has likely experienced the cost of overextension, staying too long in conversations that felt heavy, absorbing other people as pain without permission, offering support without reciprocity. There comes a moment when the body speaks more clearly than the mind, a tightness in the chest, a fatigue that sleep does not fix, an irritability that feels foreign. This is not antisocial behavior. It is the nervous system demanding protection. Hyperindependence often grows from relational wounds. When vulnerability was dismissed, the lesson learned was simple: handle it yourself. When emotional needs were labeled dramatic or excessive, the solution was to minimize them. Over time, asking for support feels unnatural, not because it is undesired, but because it once felt unsafe. So the lone wolf empath builds strength. They become capable, reliable, self-sufficient. Others admire this resilience. Yet resilience built in isolation carries a quiet loneliness, because beneath the competence is a longing to be understood without having to over-explain. It is important to understand that self-protection is not rejection. The lone wolf empath does not avoid connection because they lack love. They avoid situations where their sensitivity is exploited, where their boundaries are ignored, where they are expected to give endlessly without being seen. They've learned that proximity without safety is more damaging than distance. Solitude becomes regulation. Time alone allows the nervous system to settle. Without competing emotions pressing in, the empath can hear their own internal voice. What do I feel? What do I need? These questions are difficult to answer in constant social noise. For many lone wolf empaths, there was a time when they betrayed themselves to maintain connection. They tolerated disrespect. They stayed silent to avoid conflict. They prioritized harmony over authenticity. This strategy may have preserved relationships, but it fractured something inside. Eventually, the cost became too high. Withdrawal, then, is not a punishment. It is a boundary expressed through space. There is also the matter of depth. The lone wolf empath often struggles with superficial interaction. Small talk feels exhausting. Performative connection feels hollow. They crave sincerity, honesty, emotional depth. When these are absent, solitude feels more nourishing than shallow company. This preference does not make them antisocial, it makes them selective. Selectivity is a form of self-respect. When you have spent years overgiving, you become cautious about where your energy flows. You begin to ask whether connection is mutual, whether your presence is valued for who you are, not just what you provide. The world often rewards extroversion and constant availability. It praises those who are always present, always responsive, always accommodating. The lone wolf empath challenges this narrative simply by stepping back. Their withdrawal can make others uncomfortable because it disrupts dependency patterns. When an empath stops overextending, others must confront their own expectations. The deeper healing for the lone wolf empath is not about becoming more social. It is about redefining safety, learning that connection does not always require self-sacrifice, that boundaries can coexist with intimacy, that vulnerability does not always lead to abandonment. Self-protection, when unconscious, can harden into isolation, but when conscious it becomes discernment. The lone wolf empath is not running from people. They are running from environments that demand self-erasure. They are not rejecting love. They are rejecting dynamics that confuse love with obligation. At the core, there is still longing. the desire to share silence with someone who understands it, the wish to be seen without performing empathy, the hope that connection can feel restorative rather than draining. To honor this part of yourself is not selfish. It is necessary. You were never meant to be endlessly available. You were never meant to absorb every emotional current without pause. Your sensitivity is not a flaw to be corrected. It is a compass. And self-protection is not antisocial. It is the wisdom of a nervous system that has learned, through experience, that safety must be chosen deliberately. The lone wolf empath walks alone not because they cannot walk with others, but because they refuse to walk where their spirit is compromised. Hyper-independence is often a trauma response, not a personality trait. There is a version of strength that the world applauds, the person who never asks for help, the one who handles everything alone, the one who appears calm, capable, and unshakable in the face of pressure. We call them independent. We admire their resilience. We tell them they are built differently. But what if that independence was not freely chosen? What if it was learned in moments when dependence felt unsafe? Hyper-independence rarely begins as confidence. It begins as adaptation. In environments where emotional needs were dismissed, minimized, or punished, a child quickly learns that vulnerability carries risk. If asking for comfort leads to rejection, the nervous system makes a decision. Do not ask again. This decision is not conscious. It is protective. The child does not think, I will become hyper-independent. The child feels, it is safer to rely only on myself. When caregivers are overwhelmed, inconsistent, critical, or emotionally unavailable, the developing brain absorbs a message. Your needs are too much. Your feelings are inconvenient. Your dependence is a burden. And so the child becomes capable beyond their years. They self-soothe, they problem-solve, they suppress tears, they anticipate problems before they arise. This competence is praised. Adults may say, you are so mature, so strong, so responsible. What is rarely acknowledged is the cost. Hyper-independence is not the absence of need. It is the suppression of need. The nervous system, shaped by early experiences, prioritizes control. If I can handle everything myself, I reduce the chance of being hurt. If I do not rely on others, I cannot be disappointed. If I appear self-sufficient, no one can abandon me. Control becomes safety. Over time, this pattern solidifies into identity. The adult says, I just prefer to do things alone. I do not like depending on people. I am wired this way. But wiring is often experience encoded in the body. When someone offers help, discomfort arises. There may be anxiety, irritation, even suspicion. Not because help is unwanted, but because receiving it activates old memories, memories of inconsistency, of promises broken, of vulnerability met with shame. So the hyper-independent person declines support, not out of arrogance, but out of protection. There is also pride woven into this pattern, a quiet satisfaction in being the reliable one, the stable one, the one others turn to. Being needed can feel safer than needing, because to need is to risk exposure. In relationships, hyper-independence can create distance. Partners may feel shut out. Friends may feel unnecessary. The hyper-independent individual may insist, I am fine. I do not need anything. Yet beneath that insistence is often exhaustion. Carrying everything alone requires immense energy, decision-making without consultation, emotional processing without sharing, struggles handled in silence. It can look powerful from the outside. Inside, it can feel isolating. The body keeps the score of these patterns: chronic tension, difficulty relaxing, trouble sleeping, a constant readiness to act. The nervous system rarely fully settles because it believes vigilance is required. Hyper-independence is closely linked to attachment wounds. When early bonds were unpredictable, the child may have developed an avoidance strategy: minimize attachment needs, deactivate longing, stay self-contained. This strategy works in childhood. It reduces visible distress. It prevents further rejection. But in adulthood, it can limit intimacy. True intimacy requires interdependence, not dependence that erases the self, but mutual reliance that honors both autonomy and connection. For the hyper-independent person, interdependence can feel threatening. It involves trust. And trust in the past may have led to pain. So the pattern persists. Handle it alone. Do not burden others. Stay strong. What often goes unrecognized is that hyper-independence is not confidence. Confidence allows flexibility. It says, I can do this, and I can ask for help when needed. Hyper-independence says, I must do this alone. The difference lies in choice. Trauma narrows choice. It creates rigid strategies designed to prevent re-injury. Personality, on the other hand, is fluid. It allows adaptation without fear. When someone says, this is just who I am, it is worth gently asking, when did I learn I had to be this way? Healing does not require abandoning independence. It requires softening the rigidity around it. It involves allowing small experiments with trust, sharing a worry instead of solving it privately, accepting help without immediately reciprocating, letting someone witness imperfection. These acts may feel uncomfortable at first. The body may interpret them as unsafe. That is the echo of old experience, not the truth of the present. It is important to approach this gently. Hyperindependence once protected you. It carried you through situations where relying on others was not possible. It deserves compassion, not criticism. But protection that was necessary then may not be necessary now. There is strength in self-reliance. There is also strength in connection. When independence becomes a shield against vulnerability, it limits growth. When it becomes a choice rather than a compulsion, it empowers. You are not broken for learning to survive alone. You adapted in the only way available to you. The work now is not to become dependent. It is to rediscover safety in shared space, to recognize that needing others does not diminish your worth, to understand that asking for support is not weakness. Hyper-independence is often a story of resilience shaped by absence. And resilience can evolve. You can remain capable while allowing closeness. You can stay strong while admitting difficulty. You can honor the part of you that survived by self-reliance, while slowly teaching your nervous system that support no longer equals danger. That is not a change in personality. It is a return to wholeness. There comes a moment in many lives when exhaustion can no longer be explained by workload alone. It is not the tasks that drain you. It is the constant override of your own limits. The quiet yes when your body is saying no. The smile when resentment is rising underneath. The agreement that feels like self-betrayal. Boundaries are not rigid walls meant to shut others out. They are the invisible lines that protect the integrity of the self. They define where you end and another person begins. Without them, relationships become entanglements. With them, connection becomes respectful. Many people struggle with boundaries because early in life, having them was not safe. If saying no led to withdrawal of love, punishment, or guilt, the nervous system learned quickly. Compliance keeps connection. Silence keeps peace. Self-sacrifice preserves belonging. A child does not choose attachment over authenticity consciously. It is automatic. Belonging is survival, so the child adapts. They become agreeable, helpful, accommodating. Over time, this adaptation solidifies into identity. As adults, these individuals may pride themselves on being easygoing, low maintenance, always there for others. Yet beneath the reliability is often quiet depletion. When boundaries are repeatedly crossed, the body reacts before the mind does. Tight shoulders, a heavy chest, a subtle irritation that lingers. These are not random sensations. They are signals. The nervous system recognizing that something feels off. But if you have been conditioned to ignore these signals, you may override them. You may tell yourself it is not a big deal. You may rationalize the behavior of others. You may minimize your discomfort. Over time, this pattern erodes self-trust, because each time you dismiss your internal warning, you send yourself a message. Your feelings are not important. Boundaries restore that trust. They are an act of self-respect. They say my time matters, my energy matters, my emotional safety matters. Not more than yours, not less than yours, equal. It is important to understand that boundaries are not about controlling others. They are about clarifying what you will and will not participate in. You cannot force someone to behave differently. You can decide what access they have to you if they do not. When someone resists your boundary, it often reveals how much they benefited from your lack of one. There may be pushback, accusations of selfishness, claims that you have changed. In truth, you have changed. You are no longer willing to abandon yourself to maintain harmony. There is grief in this process, because setting boundaries may alter relationships. Some connections were built on your overextension. When you withdraw that overextension, the dynamic shifts. This does not mean you are unkind. It means you are no longer available for imbalance. Boundaries also require clarity within yourself. You must recognize your limits before you can communicate them. What exhausts you? What feels disrespectful? What triggers resentment? These are not flaws to hide. They are information. Many fear that boundaries will lead to isolation, that saying no will leave them alone. But relationships that cannot tolerate your limits are not sustainable ones. Healthy connection thrives on mutual respect. When both people feel safe expressing needs, intimacy deepens. It is also essential to release the belief that boundaries must be harsh to be effective. They can be calm, direct, simple. I am not available for that. I need time to think. That does not work for me. You do not owe lengthy explanations for protecting your well-being. Guilt often accompanies boundary setting, especially for those raised to prioritize others. Guilt does not mean you are wrong. It often means you are doing something unfamiliar. The nervous system interprets change as risk, even healthy change. With repetition, however, the body learns that expressing limits does not result in catastrophe. Sacredness implies something worthy of reverence. Boundaries deserve that reverence because they guard your mental, emotional, and physical health. Without them, resentment accumulates. Resentment, when unaddressed, erodes compassion. You may find yourself withdrawing abruptly or exploding unexpectedly, not because you are volatile, but because your limits were ignored for too long. Clear boundaries prevent that build-up. They allow small corrections before large ruptures. There is strength in saying no early rather than yes resentfully. There is also compassion in boundaries. When you communicate clearly, you give others the opportunity to respond differently. You teach them how to relate to you in ways that are sustainable. Some will adjust, some will not. Your responsibility is not to manage their reaction. It is to remain aligned with your values. If you were taught that love requires endurance, boundaries will feel radical. If you were praised for selflessness, limits may feel selfish. But love without limits becomes enmeshment. Generosity without discernment becomes depletion. To honor your boundaries is to honor your humanity. You are not a resource to be endlessly accessed. You are not obligated to carry what others refuse to hold themselves. You are not required to sacrifice your peace to prove your loyalty. Boundaries are sacred because they protect your capacity to love without losing yourself. When you treat them as negotiable, you teach others that your comfort is optional. When you treat them as sacred, you teach yourself that your well-being is essential. This is not about becoming rigid or unapproachable. It is about becoming congruent. When your words match your limits, when your actions reflect your values, when your presence is offered freely rather than extracted through obligation. Boundaries are not barriers to connection. They are the foundation that allows connection to remain healthy, balanced, and real from the very beginning of life. Belonging feels like survival. An infant does not question whether connection is necessary. The body knows. Without attachment, there is danger. Without acceptance, there is vulnerability. So the longing to belong is not weakness. It is biological. As children, we study the environment carefully. What earns approval? What brings closeness? What creates distance? We adjust accordingly. If expressing anger leads to rejection, we suppress anger. If being quiet earns praise, we become quiet. If achievement brings affection, we strive endlessly. These adjustments are intelligent. They protect attachment. But over time, something subtle happens. We begin to confuse adaptation with identity. We no longer ask who we are. We ask who we need to be. Belonging built on adaptation feels secure on the surface. People accept you. They praise you. They rely on you. Yet inside, there may be a quiet dissonance. A sense of performing rather than living. A fatigue that comes not from effort alone, but from self-abandonment. Authenticity requires risk. It means revealing preferences that may not align with the group. It means speaking truths that could create discomfort. It means allowing others to see parts of you that are not polished for approval. For many, this feels threatening because early experiences may have taught that authenticity jeopardizes connection. A child who expressed sadness and was told to toughen up learns to hide vulnerability. A child who questioned authority and was shamed learns to silence curiosity. The nervous system encodes these lessons. Better to belong than to be rejected. Better to be liked than to be real. But belonging at the cost of authenticity creates internal fragmentation. One part of you engages with the world. Another part retreats into hiding. Over time, this split can manifest as anxiety, resentment, or a vague sense of emptiness. When you consistently betray your inner truth to maintain external harmony, the body keeps record. There is tension in conversations where you agree but feel resistance. There is heaviness after gatherings where you performed a version of yourself that does not fully reflect who you are. Authenticity is not about dramatic declarations or constant confrontation. It is about alignment. Alignment between what you feel and what you express, between what you value and how you live. The fear of losing belonging is powerful. Humans are wired for connection, yet connection that demands self-erasure is not true belonging. It is conditional acceptance. Conditional acceptance says you are welcome as long as you remain convenient, as long as you do not disrupt expectations, as long as you continue to play the role assigned to you. Authenticity challenges that condition. It says, this is who I am, even if it unsettles you. There is grief in choosing authenticity. Some relationships may shift. Some people may withdraw because they were attached not to your essence but to your compliance. This does not mean authenticity leads to isolation. It filters connection. It reveals who can meet you in truth and who preferred the edited version. Many people who prioritize belonging over authenticity become experts in reading others. They sense what is desired and provide it. They become adaptable, agreeable, easy to be around. Yet they may struggle to answer simple questions about their own needs. What do I want? What do I enjoy? What feels right for me? When your energy has long been directed outward toward maintaining connection, turning inward can feel unfamiliar. Authenticity begins quietly, not with announcements, but with noticing. Noticing when you say yes but mean no. Noticing when laughter feels forced. Noticing when silence hides something important. It requires compassion for the part of you that learned to adapt. That adaptation once protected you. It preserved relationships that felt necessary. There is wisdom in that survival strategy, but survival is not the same as wholeness. Wholeness invites integration. It allows you to belong without fragmenting yourself. It accepts that not everyone will resonate with your truth. It trusts that alignment attracts deeper connection than performance ever could. Belonging that honors authenticity feels different. It feels calm rather than anxious. There's less monitoring of how you are perceived, less calculation of what to say next. You can exhale in such spaces. The paradox is that authenticity often leads to more meaningful belonging. When you show up as you are, those who remain are connected to your reality, not your mask. There may still be discomfort. Vulnerability does not eliminate fear, but the fear shifts. It is no longer the fear of being discovered as insufficient. It becomes the courage of being seen as real. Choosing authenticity is not a rejection of connection. It is a refinement of it. You are not meant to shrink to fit environments that cannot accommodate your truth. You are not meant to silence your perspective to preserve comfort. You are not required to trade your inner clarity for external approval. Belonging is important, but belonging that costs you your voice, your preferences, your boundaries, your essence becomes a subtle form of self-abandonment. Authenticity restores internal coherence. It aligns your outer life with your inner experience. It reduces the exhaustion of performance. It rebuilds trust with yourself. When authenticity matters more than belonging, decisions change. You choose spaces where you can speak honestly. You gravitate toward people who appreciate depth rather than compliance. You allow misunderstanding rather than distortion. There is freedom in that choice, because when you no longer contort yourself to fit, you discover who truly resonates with your presence. Authenticity does not guarantee universal acceptance. It guarantees self-respect for many sensitive people. Empathy flows outward effortlessly. You sense shifts in tone. You recognize unspoken sadness. You adjust your behavior to ease tension before it escalates. Compassion for others feels natural, almost automatic. Yet when the same compassion is needed for your own pain, something tightens. You minimize it, you rationalize it, you tell yourself others have it worse. The empathy you extend so generously outward rarely circles back. This pattern often begins early. As a child, attuning to others may have been a way to maintain connection. If a parent was overwhelmed, you became accommodating. If there was conflict, you softened yourself to restore harmony. Your sensitivity became a bridge to safety. Over time, that bridge pointed in only one direction: empathy outward, judgment inward. When you hurt, you may respond with criticism rather than care. You replay mistakes. You question your reactions. You analyze rather than soothe. The inner dialogue becomes harsher than any external voice. This is not because you lack compassion. It is because self-compassion was not modeled or reinforced. Healing begins when you recognize this imbalance, when you notice that the same understanding you offer others is absent within yourself. Turning empathy inward does not mean becoming self-absorbed. It means acknowledging that your inner world deserves the same respect as anyone else. When you feel overwhelmed, instead of asking how to fix it quickly, you ask what the feeling is trying to communicate. When you feel anger, instead of suppressing it to remain agreeable, you explore what boundary may have been crossed. When you feel sadness, instead of distracting yourself, you allow space for it to move through. This requires slowing down. Many who are highly empathetic toward others struggle with their own emotions because they have spent years prioritizing external regulation over internal awareness. You learn to stabilize rooms before stabilizing yourself. The nervous system becomes accustomed to scanning outward. Turning inward can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. There may be fear that if you fully feel your own pain, it will overwhelm you. But emotions that are acknowledged tend to soften. Emotions that are ignored tend to intensify. Self-empathy begins with curiosity rather than correction. Instead of asking what is wrong with me, you ask what happened to me. This subtle shift transforms the internal landscape. It replaces blame with understanding. It reframes reactions as adaptations. For example, if you withdraw from someone after feeling hurt, you might label yourself distant or cold. With self-empathy, you explore the protective function of that withdrawal. You see how it once kept you safe. You honor its intention even if you choose a different response now. Self-empathy also involves recognizing your limits without shame. You are not required to absorb everyone's emotions. You are not obligated to respond to every request immediately. Fatigue is not failure. It is information. When empathy is directed only outward, burnout becomes inevitable. You carry what is not yours. You anticipate needs that were never expressed. You stretch beyond capacity in the name of care. Turning empathy inward interrupts this cycle. You begin to ask yourself before saying yes, do I have the energy? Does this align with my values? Am I responding from guilt or genuine willingness? This pause is powerful. It rebuilds trust between you and yourself. Each time you honor your internal signal, you reinforce safety within. Many people fear that self-empathy will make them less compassionate toward others. In truth, the opposite occurs. When your own needs are acknowledged, you give from fullness rather than depletion. Your care becomes sustainable rather than obligatory. There is also grief in this process. You may realize how long you have neglected your own emotional reality. You may feel sadness for the younger version of yourself, who learned that tending to others was more acceptable than tending to self. Allow that grief. It is part of integration. Healing is not dramatic. It is often quiet. It happens in small moments when you choose gentleness over self-criticism, when you rest without earning it, when you speak your truth without apologizing for it. Empathy inward means recognizing your humanity. You will make mistakes. You will have reactions you do not fully understand. You will sometimes default to old patterns. Instead of condemning yourself, you approach those moments with patience, the same patience you extend to a struggling friend. This shift transforms relationships as well. When you no longer seek worth through overgetting, your connections become more balanced. You allow others to carry their own emotions. You resist the urge to rescue because you are no longer abandoning yourself in the process. Self-empathy strengthens boundaries. It clarifies desires. It reduces resentment. It increases authenticity. It teaches your nervous system that you are not alone inside your own experience. For those who have long been the emotional anchor for others, this can feel revolutionary. You become your own safe place. And from that place, connection changes. You are still compassionate, still perceptive, still caring. But now your empathy includes you. Healing begins there, not in fixing yourself, but in finally offering yourself. The understanding you have always given so freely to the world there is a difference between being alone and being disconnected. One is a conscious return to the self. The other is a defense against pain. For many sensitive and deeply attuned individuals, solitude is not a rejection of others. It is a biological necessity. The nervous system is constantly responding to cues of safety and threat, tone of voice, facial expressions, subtle tension in posture. Highly perceptive people register these signals quickly and often unconsciously. Over time, this continuous attunement creates stimulation that accumulates in the body. Even in pleasant social environments, there is activation. Conversation requires monitoring. Emotional exchanges require processing. Being seen requires a certain level of alertness. For someone with a sensitive nervous system, this alertness can be exhausting. Solitude allows the system to downshift. When you are alone, there is no need to interpret anyone else's emotional state. No need to adjust yourself in response to subtle changes. The body can release the microtensions it holds in social space. Breathing deepens. Muscles soften. Thoughts slow. This is not antisocial behavior. It is regulation. Many people misunderstand this need. They assume that preferring time alone means disliking company. They interpret withdrawal as coldness. What they do not see is the physiological reset taking place. If early life required hyper-awareness of others, the nervous system may have learned to stay in a mild state of vigilance. Even in adulthood, social engagement can trigger that old pattern. The body prepares to adapt, to respond, to manage. Solitude interrupts that cycle. It provides a context where nothing is required, no performance, no emotional labor, no subtle negotiation of roles. In that space, the self can re-emerge without pressure. Isolation, by contrast, is driven by fear. It is fueled by the belief that connection will harm or overwhelm. It often carries loneliness and longing beneath it. Solitude feels different. It is chosen. It nourishes rather than depletes. There is relief in it, not despair. For individuals who have long prioritized others' needs, being alone may be the only time they feel fully authentic. In social settings, there can be a subtle tendency to accommodate, to adjust tone, to soften opinions. Alone, there is no need to edit. The nervous system experiences this authenticity as safety. When you do not have to monitor how you are perceived, your body rests. There's also creativity in solitude. When external stimuli quiet down, internal processes become clearer. Emotions that were pushed aside during busy interactions rise gently to the surface. Insights emerge without force. This internal spaciousness is essential for integration. Without regular solitude, sensitive individuals may become irritable or fatigued without understanding why. They may blame themselves for being distant or withdrawn. In reality, their system is simply overloaded. Modern culture often glorifies constant connection. Notifications, conversations, social obligations. There is an unspoken expectation of availability. But constant accessibility does not equal emotional health. The nervous system evolved with rhythms of engagement and retreat. Social mammals alternate between connection and rest. Ignoring this rhythm creates imbalance. Solitude restores equilibrium. It is important, however, to distinguish between conscious retreat and unconscious avoidance. If being alone is used exclusively to escape vulnerability, growth becomes limited. But when solitude is used to recalibrate, it strengthens the capacity for healthy connection. After true regulation, you return to others more grounded, more present, less reactive. When the nervous system is settled, empathy becomes sustainable. You listen without absorbing. You engage without losing yourself. For some, guilt accompanies the desire for solitude. They may feel they are disappointing others, that they should be more available. This guilt often traces back to earlier conditioning where presence equaled worth. But worth is not measured by constant accessibility. Choosing solitude is choosing balance. It is acknowledging that your internal state matters as much as external expectations. There is also a subtle courage in embracing solitude. In a world that equates busyness with importance, stepping back can feel rebellious. It requires confidence in your own rhythms. You begin to notice what environments overstimulate you, which conversations leave you drained, which relationships require more energy than they return. Solitude sharpens this awareness. From that awareness, boundaries become clear. You are not withdrawing to punish anyone. You are creating the conditions necessary for your nervous system to function optimally. Over time, when solitude is honored rather than resisted, the body trusts that regulation is available. Social interaction becomes less threatening because you know restoration will follow. This trust reduces anxiety. You are no longer trapped in endless engagement. Solitude also deepens self-relationship. Without distraction, you encounter your own thoughts and emotions directly. At first, this can feel uncomfortable, but with patience, it becomes grounding. You learn that being alone does not mean being abandoned. You discover that your own presence is steady. This realization transforms how you approach connection. You no longer cling out of fear of emptiness. You choose relationships from fullness. Solitude then becomes a bridge rather than a barrier. It prepares you to engage without self-sacrifice. It reminds your nervous system that safety exists within, and from that internal safety, connection becomes choice rather than obligation.